Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about downtime. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, do you try to upskill yourself in the downtime between two jobs, or do you enjoy the break? Well, I usually don't um, I don't really have much leisure time in terms of it's hard to just to describe this in a good way, but there is very little difference between those times that I've been between two jobs or so forth and my free time, because usually I do a fair bit of studying, almost I think almost on a daily basis. I mean, some days I'm a bit tired, so I might do something very light and just read the news or something like that, but it's not really. I spend a lot of time with in a lot of different topics within IT because I find it genuinely interesting. So the main difference I have spotted between that and what I've done in the past when I've been between two jobs. Now this hasn't happened all that many times, but that is usually that when I've applied for jobs, the last time I did it, basically I applied to three different jobs, something like that. I sent out like interest or three or four or something like that. I can't remember exactly. That seemed sort of interesting, and one of them was using a stack that was on a stack that I hadn't done work with. In this specific case, it was Angular that they were using on the front end, and they were doing Java back end, and then they were using OpenShift for deployments, etc., etc. And so, for example, I had never worked with OpenShift. I've only worked with Kubernetes and Angular. Yeah, know enough Angular to be able to produce applications and like do all the things, but I know I needed a refresher on it. And Java was a similar sort of beast because the past 3 years or four or something like that, I hadn't been doing Java specifically. That was in the earlier days, but I did Scala, which is a JVM-based language. So there were a few topics which I had, which I thought, well, it's probably good to just do a refresher because I mean, Java isn't all. I mean, I still remember all my Java development. It's more about making sure that you remember. In this case, they were using Spring Boot, so you need to make sure that you know how the authentication setups work and how to make sure that you know how to at least get up a local work environment and then deploy and so forth and so forth. And it didn't take. It's sort of like riding a bicycle, as I like to say. I've said the same thing about Python and so forth because it's the same deal for me with Python, where I did a lot of Python development in the early days of my career, but I haven't done it for years since then because it's not something that I've been using in any of my jobs. So a refresher is always a good thing, and that's usually what I do. Like I try to, depending on the jobs that I've looked at, I try to just take a refresher of like these are the things, because usually there are two types of interviewers. And one type is the people who will ask you about specifics related to the tools and like your experience working within the industry, and the other one is more algorithmic computer sciencey stuff. And during that specific time, I didn't know which if I would get a reply on from any of them, and so I was sort of like just studying a little bit, and then I just had some downtime, so I thought, all right, you know what? Usually there is a lot of these sort of computer sciencey questions that might come my way. Let's do some lead code exercises. And before you ask me, no, there was no overlap whatsoever between the lead coding exercises that I did and the exercises they asked me to do, because as I've said 100 times before, guys, this idea that you're going to study a bunch of algorithms and before you apply for a job, and then that's going to be like, you're gonna it's very unlikely that you're gonna be so lucky that they're gonna ask you the same computer science questions that you've done on LeetCode or something like that. The the only time you really want to invest in this sort of stuff is if for some reason it's really more an emotional thing where you think that you are preparing yourself to deal with a computer science question, when the reality is that, as I've said before, unless you know your stuff, it's actually very unlikely that it's going to help you solve the problems that you face within the interview. Because an example would be, let's say that you were unclear about recursion. Because recursion isn't something that a lot of people use on a regular basis outside of computer science questions, because a lot of the classical computer science algorithm problems like Fibonacci or whatever, it doesn't have to be the Fib algorithm, are based on recursion. Well, it doesn't have to be, but usually they are. And if that is the case, then sure, practicing a little bit is a good thing, and the same thing goes for more advanced like data models or things like that, but usually that's not what the computer science questions were. And so when I got a call back, I had 2 interviews that were more like experience based. They basically let me do a code test as per usual, and then there was one code test that was like computer science, the algorithm based. I sent in I think it was 3, and got 3 replies back. And then I went to the personal interviews, and as I said, the company who was using the Angular stuff and like the Java stuff, they didn't really care so much about how much Angular I knew. They were only interested in, do I know the foundation principles behind object-oriented programming, and can I code in Java? And so, yeah. Well, I don't actually know if they would make me an offer, because I got another job before they replied. But I got 2 offers, and then they had needed some extra time because this was a government job. So the government jobs always takes longer to get to usually, well, at least in my region. So what I want you to take away from this is that I always sort of try to upskills, but that's not because I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to get a job somewhere else or so forth. And so taking a break is fine, I think, for people. I like to invest my time in refreshing the things that I'm a little bit unclear about, because I know that when you are in an interviewing stage, the thing that really matters is how well do you communicate, and how well with what level of confidence can you speak and like perform in an interviewing situation. Because the thing that a lot of software developers, I wouldn't say just software developers, but people in general don't understand is that, guys, all your certificates, all the education, all the extra stuff that you put on your CV, etc., etc., it comes down to one thing only, and that is that you need to be able to convince the person who is sitting across from you that they should hire you. That is what it comes down to. Nothing else matters. That is everything. And the goal for you in that situation is to be able to communicate in a way that proves to whoever you're talking to that you know your stuff. I don't have, like, one of the companies, they were asking me about Amazon or so forth, and all I told them was that yes, I have AWS experience, but I'm not a DevOps engineer or like an ops person. So they started asking me, okay, what services have you been working with? Well, I've usually spin up a few EC2 instances, put them on a private network, put up some like a DNS domain, we've used Kubernetes a little bit, Elastic Beanstalk for some simple projects. What is it called? Lightsail was something I set up for a company, for a friend's company, etc., etc. I just used the words, and sure, and based on my explanation, they sort of understood. Yeah, okay, he has like some understanding of what these concepts are, and then we talked more about like coding related things and so forth and so forth. So it wasn't like I had to go and get that certification to prove to them that I knew that, because based on how I talked to them, they could figure out that I knew the things that I knew. It was the same thing with the Java interview and like Angular and like all of this sort of stuff, because people who usually know their stuff usually know what to listen for. And so my recommendation to people is that if you're looking for a job, it's always a good investment to just make sure that you refresh the stuff that you should know for the opportunity. One thing that I always find hilarious is the classic argument that a lot of people do when they come to, sometimes they do when they interview for the position at the companies that I worked at, which is that, oh, I don't know that, and then they sort of immediately excuse themselves, but I could look that up immediately, and so forth and so forth. And I kind of go, of course you can. That's not a problem, but I can also tell the difference between something that you need a refresher in, when you, like as I said, like when I told them that I haven't been working in Angular for some time, but I can probably swing it. They checked it, and as I was saying, I can also check when you need a refresher, which just takes a few minutes, and when you don't actually know your shit whatsoever. And that's why I tell people, if you do need a refresher, go for it. But it's really up to you how you want to play it. If you are going to apply for a job where you're going to use the exact same thing that you've been using for years and years, well, then enjoy your break if that is what you want. Have a great day.